second Yortzeit was on the last day of Chol Hamoed. He was a young man who sadly passed away at the age of only 58. And by all accounts, he was a very special person. So we dedicate the learning to his memory, and also to Harav Menachem Mendel ben Harav David Tzvi Daim Schneebalg, who passed away yesterday at the age of 100. Rav Schneebalg was a very special person indeed, a very humble person, a very thoughtful person. He was, when he first came to Manchester, he was the Rav of the Prestwick Stiebel, known as Damesek Eliezer, and then he went on to follow his father as Rav of Machziki Adas for many, many years. He was a very, very special gentleman. There are two stories I just want to share with you about Rav Schneebalg, and I know that he would be pleased that we were dedicating some learning in his memory. I'm sure we won't be the only ones, but I think he would be pleased with our particular approach to learning. I used to at one time in a previous life be a doctor in Manchester, and I looked after the Rebbetzin Schneebalg, and she was quite a sick lady, but we looked after her, and it was always a pleasure to go and see her, and the Ruv, as he used to be known as, the Ruv.
Are these new socks?
And so we were once at a bar mitzvah. I was once at a bar mitzvah, a very Hasidic bar mitzvah. And the reason I was invited was that my son was taught by the Baal Simcha. He was one of his sort of favorite pupils. So he invited him and he invited me to this bar mitzvah. We were just about the only non-Hasidic guests there. And it was, as you can imagine, a bit of a balagan. There was no seating plan or anything like that. So we arrived and we sat down at this table, and everybody else started arriving, took one look at us and sat somewhere else. And all the other tables started to fill up, and we were sat there left on our own at this table. And when all the other tables were full and the people coming in had nowhere else to sit, they'd come to our table, take off the cutlery, and then go and squeeze in where there was nowhere to squeeze on somebody else's table. And so Dan and I were left there on our own, feeling a little bit, we say, conspicuous by the fact that nobody wanted to sit next to us at all. And it was becoming a bit amusing because these other tables were completely and utterly squashed up. And there was us with this whole table to ourselves. My Rabbi Goldberg then arrived, and he obviously saw our predicament and came to sit on our table. And then the Baal Simcha came straight away and schlepped him off there and put him on the top table. So there we were, still sitting on our own in this bar mitzvah. And then what happened was Rav Schneebalg arrived. And of course, he came with all his entourage. He came with all his Hasidim, and there was, like, Kriyas Yamsuf. Everybody sort of parts as he arrives, and he walks in, and he was a short, stocky man, and he waddled in with his silver-topped cane, and he stops, and he sees me, and he makes a beeline straight for me, and he starts talking to me. And I could feel the atmosphere. You could almost see the neurons working in all these Hasidic minds, thinking, why is the Rav gone over to that Shaigetz over there that nobody's sitting with? Who is he? What's going on here? Anyway, the day before, or a couple of days before, I'd spent quite a bit of time with the Rebbetzin looking after her. And he had come over to me, especially to thank me for that. and he wanted to actually sit on our table with me and Dan. Of course, the Baal Simcha wouldn't allow it, schlepped him back off onto the top table. But it was really very typical of him. He saw me and wanted to thank me for what I'd done, which wasn't very much, to be honest, but nevertheless, he wanted to thank me for that. And that was the kind of person that he was. He was a very, very special and very humble person. And the other little story I want to tell you, Jeffrey will remember this story, and that was that same son of mine, when he had his first son, so my oldest grandson, he was the assistant rabbi at Jeffrey's Shul in South Manchester in Bowden, which was a community which was not a particularly Hasidic community, let's put it that way. It was pretty traditional, let's put it that way. Anyway, the Ruv agreed to come and be Sandek for my oldest grandson, which was a big honor, and we were very pleased and very humbled that he came. And he was an old man already by then. He was 100 when he died. Ellie is 11, so he was already 89 by then, and quite infirm. But he schlepped down to South Manchester and early in the morning, and he came for this bris, and he walked in and he wore his Rebbe because he was going to be Sandek. He had his Shabbos clothes on, so he had his white silk scarf and his silver-topped cane and a long, beautiful silk bekisha. And as he came in, you could almost feel the intake of breath of all the people in Bowden who probably never seen such a sight in real life before, and it was just so impressive, and the kavod, the honor that was accorded to him, quite rightly, was really something to observe, and it was an episode that I'll certainly never forget. It certainly made the bris of my oldest grandson that bit more special even than it would have been otherwise. So we dedicate the shiur both to Yitzchak David ben Nachman, that's Avril's brother, and Harav Menachem Mendel ben Harav David Tzvi. So,
Jonathan,
did you speak English with him, Johnny?
I spoke Yiddish with him.
Yeah.
He did speak English. He certainly understood English. His English, his spoken English was understandable, but not particularly great.
Yeah, I've spoken English.
Jonathan, I just want to add something. The man's memory was phenomenal. Some 40 years earlier, Marcel and I had the honor to build the men's mikveh at Maxi Kiedas. And Dan Schneebel was the Rav who supervised the construction of the mikveh. And his knowledge was incredible. And he used to go down the ladders into the foundations, into the hole, to inspect the ground, to see that it was fit for us to proceed to the next stage. He was almost like the building inspector, but obviously very revered. Now, I hadn't seen that Rav for 40 odd years until he came to Bowden. And you introduced me to him as your cousin. And he said, Glasky, he said, you and your brother worked on my mikveh. He remembered that. Now, that was something quite remarkable. I had Marcel had much more contact with him than I did. I had maybe 2 or 3 meetings with him. And he was very, very saintly man. But what a memory. Incredible.
Yeah, I'm afraid that, as we said, I'm afraid a few times this last year or so, they don't make him like that anymore. He will be sadly missed, the end of another era in Manchester, I'm afraid. But we all have tremendous memories of Rav Schneebel. I don't think there was anybody that could have had a bad word to say about him. He was a very, very special and saintly man, as you say.
Who would take over, Johnny, if you don't go, whilst we're on the subject? Have you got someone to take over from him?
Well, it ain't going to be me, I can tell you that.
Okay.
It ain't going to be Ravi Doe either. So,
funny. Well, Jeffrey was talking about the mikveh, something quite funny. When we demolished, the Rav was giving me shiurim on and explained to me about all the dinim of the mikveh. And one of the things he made very clear to me that the mikveh must not be a kela, must not be a clay. It's got to be in situ. Okay. Now, when we demolished the old mikveh, we couldn't break it up. So we had a crane there, and the crane lifted the whole mikveh up and put it on the back of a wagon. And I said to him, Diane, look at this. Your old mikveh was exactly a kela because it stuck together, the whole thing as one piece. And he started laughing. He said, that's why we're having a new one.
That's a great story. Thank you for that. That's a great story. I'm sure there will be many, many stories of Rav Schneebaug's 100 years. He was a very special man. I was privileged. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was privileged to look after many of the senior rabbanim in Manchester. I was present when the Manchester Rosh Hashiva passed away. I was very close with Diane Westheim, as you all know, and I was also privileged to look after the Ruv and his wife. I didn't realize how privileged I was at the time, but I suppose that's youth for you. As my old man used to say, you can't put an old head on young shoulders, but there you go. Right, let's learn some Gemarah in memory of those two special people. Right, we are in Gemarah Sanhedrin. Let's get the Gemarah up. So page 43 for those who are on in the Steinsaltz Gemarah there. There it is on the screen for you. We are on the bottom of Daf Chet Amud Aleph, page 8a, for those of you that are in a Big Boys Gemarah or the Art Scroll. And we're at one of our little symbols here, which tells us that we are starting a new subject. And we're actually, for once, on subject. We're going to be talking about something which we learnt in the Mishnah back in November 2019, in the days when Corona was a beer and not a virus. So let's just go and have a look at the Mishnah itself, which is on page 7 of the Steinsaltz Gemarah there. Let's just find it on the screen. There we go. Here we go. So the Mishnah said, this is the bit that we're going to be doing now. Let's just whiz it from the top. We've spent the last 18 months getting as far as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 words in the Mishnah. We have spent 18 months. So that's just about a month a word. But we're up to this bit here, Hamotzi Shem Ra. So the Mishnah says, Ha'ones v'hamafateh v'hamotzi Shem Ra bishlosha. The Mishnah says that cases of rape or seduction or of defamatory speech, somebody who is motzi Shem Ra, it defames the name of somebody, bishlosha, is dealt with by 3 judges. Divrei Rabbi Meir. That's what Rabbi Meir says. However, Chachamim Omrim, the rabbis disagree. And they say, no, motzi Shem Ra be'esrim ushlosha. a motzi shem ra, somebody who defames somebody or is accused of defamation, their case is dealt with by 23 judges. Why? We know already that 23 judges is the number of judges which are required for a capital case. And the reason that a defamation case is judged by 23 is because it could turn into a capital case. Mipnei sheh, that's Hebrew for because. Mipnei sheyesh bo dinei nefashot. It's a possibility that it may become a capital case. How will that be? Well, we're going to see in the Gemara now. The Mishnah, well, Rav Steinsaltz gives us a bit of a heads up here about how it can become a capital case, but we're going to find out for ourselves now, and we're going to go back to page 43. If I can move this thing out of the way, there we go. Go back to page 43, where we're up to. Oh, 434, that's not right. Let's try again. There we go. There's our Mishnah now. So, here we go. V'chachamim omrim, we're quoting the Mishnah now that we've just said. The rabbi said, Motzi Shem Ra be'esrim u'shlosha. The case of Motzi Shem Ra is judged with 23 judges. So we need to know what this case of Motzi Shem Ra is about. Today, in common parlance, if you say that's Motzi Shem Ra about somebody, that means you have said something defamatory about him, which is not true. If you say something defamatory about somebody that is true, what's that called? Yes, Marcel's right. Just we heard him, lip-read him. Lashon hara. Lashon hara is true. It's not nice. You can't start saying these things, but it's true. If it's not true, it's called Motzei Shem Ra, which literally means Motzei, to bring out, Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz, yeah, who brings out bread from the ground. So Motzi, somebody who brings out, Shem, a name, Ra, which is bad. Ra is evil, yeah. So Motzi Shem Ra means that you are bringing about a bad name for somebody. And that's what it's come to mean in modern parlance, that if you speak in a negative, defamatory way about somebody and it's not true, then that's called Motzi Shem Ra. But the original Torah case of Motzi Shem Ra was not as straightforward as that. It was very much more specific. There was one specific case where a person said something defamatory about another person, which wasn't true, and that is known as Motzi Shem Ra. So without looking in Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 13 to 19, without looking in there, who knows what the case of Motzi Shem Ra is? Because Leon is going to read it to us in a minute, but if anybody knows it without looking, then speak up. I'm sure you know it, David. It's in Parashat Ki Teitzei.
Correct, in Shvi, I think. Yeah, it's the, you want me to say, it's the person who says that the woman that's just got married wasn't, sorry, the husband claims that she wasn't a virgin when the marriage was consummated.
Correct. Spot on. Right. By the way, I did all warn you 2 weeks ago that this particular shiur was not for the feminist inclined folk in our group because there are some difficulties, let's put it that way, as you will see. Let's go and have a look at the psukim themselves from Parshat Kitei. And I have them on the screen. Let me share the screen with you. This is from Parshat Kitei, chapter 22 of Devarim, and it is verse 13 onwards, Leon.
If a man marries a wife and comes to her and hates her, and he makes a wanton accusation against her, spreading a bad name against her, and he said, I married this woman and I came near to her, and I did not find signs of virginity on her.
Stop there for a second, Leon, please. Just noticed something, actually. Let's just look at the Hebrew in verse 14. So verse 13 says, if he takes a wife and he comes along and he doesn't like her, V'sam la alilot. What's that word remind you of?
Yesterday's share.
Yes, Johnny, excellent. We went through some of the
5 cases,
meanings
6
of
cases.
the word Belial. In yesterday's shiur, we talked about the sons of Eli HaKohen, Chofni and Pinchas, and they were described as Bnei Belial. And we had various different translations, uncouth, lawless, scoundrels, all those sorts of negative words. And I brought for you 5 or 6 different places in Tanakh where this word Belial meant various different things. One of them was actually bearing false witness. And here we've got another example. I could have brought this example as well. Johnny is right. The word alilut is the same word as Belial from yesterday's shiur. So, V'sam la alilut. How did you describe that, Leon? How did you translate that?
And he makes a wanton accusation against her.
A wanton accusation, and our translation on the screen says a libelous charge. So I think I prefer this one, actually, libelous charge. I think it gives, it tells us more clearly what's going along here, because then it says v'hotzi aleha shem ra. There's your motzi shem ra. He brings out a bad name for her. Is that a hand up, Julia?
It is. I'm being very pedantic, but I do have to tell you that in law, it isn't libelous unless it's written down. Slander is the word for spoken.
Correct. Yes, I actually did know that. It's one of those few things about law that I did know. Now, does he write this down? No, he doesn't write this down as far as I can see. So yes, it should be a slanderous charge. Quite right, Julia. We'll write to Chabad and ask them to correct it in the next version. Quite right. Well done. Then v'hotzi aleha shem ra. He brings out this bad name. This is the motzi shem ra case. And what does he say? When I drew near to this woman, in other words, when I went to consummate the marriage, lo matzati la betulim. Betulim are signs of virginity. So we don't need to go into the anatomy and physiology, but it's the same word as the word for a virgin or a young girl in Hebrew is betula.
Betula.
And the reason is because she has betulim. Betulim are the signs of virginity. So he comes along and he accuses her of not being a virgin. Now, of course, these days that would not be possible to do, because with the modern method of women's sanitation, most girls in the world, that's perhaps not in certain sects of the world, certainly most girls in the Western world, whether they be virgins or not, would not have signs of virginity, because they are destroyed, as it were, in sort of ladies' sanitation these days. But back in the day, it was a very important thing. And so then what happens is he accuses this woman of not being a virgin. So the father of the girl and the mother of the girl do the following, verse 15.
And the father of the girl and her mother should take and bring proofs of the girl's virginity to the elders of the city, to the gate.
Okay, so how did they do that? How did the parents prove that she was indeed a virgin?
I suppose they would have to give oral evidence that she's never been out of their sight, basically, or out of their control. And they know that there's never been a bloke guy near her.
Well, that would be hearsay, would it not? That wouldn't be.
No, that would be their oral evidence.
They had to have physical evidence of blood so that they would be able to justify after the marriage had been consummated that there was evidence that there was blood somewhere.
That's right. So what they would do, you're quite right, Nachum. What they would do is they would bring the marital bed sheet from the consummation of the marriage, which would have evidence of the breaking of the betulim, the breaking of that what is known as the hymen, not the people that own Titanics. That's hymen, Hymen, and that causes bleeding, and therefore what they used to do, they would bring the marital bed sheet and show the elders at the gate of the city where everybody was gathered. See, this man accuses my daughter of not being a virgin, and the implication, of course, is that if she's not a virgin, then she has committed adultery. And I'll tell you why that's an assumption in a moment. So they come along. This is a very important thing. They come along and they say that's not true. Here is our evidence. And they produce the marital bed sheet. Okay, verse 16.
The father of the girl should say to the elders, I gave my daughter to this man as a wife, and he hated her. Now, behold, he made a wanton accusation against her, saying, I did not find signs of virginity on your daughter. But these are the signs of virginity of my daughter. And they should spread out the sheet before the elders of the city.
There we go. There it is in black and white. That's exactly what they did.
Or red and white.
Thank you.
Or red and white.
Thank you, Howard. I was trying not to bring it down to
I
that.
stole your thunder. I'm so sorry.
I was trying not to bring it down to that level, but never mind.
No, but if she's a virgin, it would be all white. No red.
I must say, the standard of proof seems very low. It could be anybody's sheet and anybody's blood. I mean, my oral evidence is just as good as they're going to have to give oral evidence that this is the sheet.
Not necessarily, because it may well be that each household had its own sheet, and the virgin wife, after the consummation of the marriage, takes this sheet and keeps it as proof of her virginity, because there were unscrupulous men like this man here who might try and accuse her of not being a virgin. So it was definitely in her interests to secure the sheet from her marital bed on the first night of consummation and keep it in a safe place. So what she'd do with it, she gives it to her parents to look after, because it's a valuable piece of evidence for exactly that reason. And that, Howard, is exactly what happened. That was very commonplace. The morning after the consummation of the wedding, of the marriage, the bride would take the marital bed sheet and give it to her parents for safekeeping, just in case this situation arose. So I think it's rather a good. I think it's a rather unpleasant sort of experience for everybody, but that's what they used to do, and I think it's rather good, strong proof. Certainly better than the oral proof of the parents saying they know where she's been at all times. Yes, Julia.
Well, as long as they could test the DNA of the blood, it would be very straightforward. No problem.
Well, nowadays we possibly could.
I was just wondering whether in very religious circles now they would still do this sort of thing.
I doubt it, although maybe in Gemarah Sanhedrin they're particularly keen on this sort of thing. It's possible that such a thing is still required. I personally have not heard of it carrying on at this time. What about you, David? You ever heard of that going on today?
No. I just want to chip in that according to Gemarah in Ksubas, there's a dispute amongst the Tanoim whether this is to be taken literally or figuratively. Figuratively meaning that the bride was as white as a sheet. And it would only be if Adim, according to those who say it's figuratively, it would only be Adim that would come to prove that she wasn't a virgin, nothing to do with the sheet.
So how does that, I haven't learned that Gemarah, but how does that Gemarah deal with?
No, I haven't either. I've just got notes in front of me.
Right, but that's interesting, because we perhaps need to look at that, because how is that Gemarah going to deal with the very simple pshat of the pasuk, which clearly says, "And they shall spread the garment before the elders of the city." There's not much wiggle room there.
So you and I both. Well, we all need to learn that Gemarah, I think, John.
Okay. Well, David and I will look up that Gemarah and report back to you next week. But in the meantime, we will take it as literal. The idea about witnesses we're going to see now in our Gemarah, but we need to just understand the case. So then,
Johnny, excuse me, if there was blood on the sheet, the fellow would have known about it. Why would he make slanderous statements about it?
Because remember, he's been betrothed to this woman for a year before he gets to marry her, and he's decided in that year he don't want her anymore. It says clearly. It says it. Look at verse 13. He doesn't want her anymore. He hates her. So he's trying to get rid of her. He's trying to get rid of her, and he's trying to get rid of her on the cheap, because this is what we're going to come to in a moment.
On the sheet.
So you've got to keep the sheet for some time.
And that is exactly why what I said went on, that the bride took the sheet and gave it to her parents for safekeeping.
Well, they probably keep it with the afikoman.
Well, they keep it with what? No, what they'll keep it with, Howard, what they'll keep it with is the ketubah, because this is what we're talking about.
Look, if this was the standard of evidence at the time, and everybody knew that this is what you do, it is so fraught with fraud that you can imagine how many chicken bloods were put on sheets, how much sheep blood was put on sheets. It is just filled with the possibility.
Nachum, we know even today in certain societies that girls have operations before they get married.
Yeah. So you're right, Nachum, of course, and that was Howard's point before, that this was open to abuse.
Is this the source of the term "keeping a clean sheet"?
I think this.
What did he say?
Let's move on. So the Torah tells us what happens if this man has tried to get rid of this girl. Why would he do that? The reason he would try to do it is because if she was not a virgin, right, then he would be able to divorce her without paying the ketubah. What is the ketubah? The ketubah is the amount of money and goods that has to be given to the wife if she is divorced. But if she is divorced because she has committed adultery or is thought to have committed adultery but can't be proven, because if it was proven with 2 Adim, she would be executed. But if she is divorced on that grounds, then the man would not need to pay the ketubah. And so it's in his financial interests to defame her, to be slanderous, and to say, I did not find betulim, and therefore I'm going to get rid of this wife, and she's not going to get the ketubah. So that is why he might do it. The question is, why does he want to get rid of her? Well, he wants to get rid of her because he doesn't like her. So why doesn't he just divorce her? Because he'll have to cough up the ketubah. But this way, if he manages to defame her and get away with it, then he doesn't need to pay the ketubah. And that's what this is all about. So the parents, of course, don't want her slandered. So they bring the evidence of the daughter's virginity, and they spread the garment before the elders of the city. And then verse 18, Leon.
The elders of the city shall take that man and punish him, and they shall fine him 100 silver shekels, and give them to the father of the girl, for he had issued a slander against a virgin of Israel, and she shall remain with him as a wife. He cannot divorce her all his days.
Okay, let's just stop there and look at that pasuk, because it's an interesting pasuk, isn't it? So this fellow who tried to defame the reputation of a Bat Yisrael, a Betulat Yisrael, he is taken by the elders of the city and is punished. And what is his punishment? He has to pay a fine of 100 shekels. Not the shekels of today, 100 shekels, but 100 silver shekels. Now, if you remember, go back to Sefer Bereshit. How much did Abraham pay Ephron for the cave of Machpelah, where he buried Sarah?
400 shekels. 400
shekels. And what we said was that figure was an enormous sum. I think when we were doing Parashat HaShavua, one of the shiurim, I think I worked it out, and I think it worked out at something like 2 million shekels in today's money. That figure is in my head. I don't know why, but it was a heck of a lot of money, that 400 shekels. So let's assume that I've remembered correctly, and 400 shekels was 2 million shekels. Then 100 silver shekels here is a quarter of that, which is 500,000 shekels. It's not a small fine. It's not a small fine. 100 silver shekels is not a small fine. Remember also that the annual donation for each person to give to the Mishkan for the korbanot, etc., was how much?
Half a shekel.
Half a shekel. So this fine is 200 times the annual subscription to the Bet HaMikdash. It's not a small fine, this. I think that it seems at first glance that this fellow is not really getting much of a punishment here for doing such a terrible, dreadful thing to a girl. But and I'm not minimizing what he's done by any means, but we need to just stop and think that 100 silver shekels was a very, very large fine. So
Now, isn't there some way that he could be doing this with ignorance? He doesn't know for sure, because this sounds very ridiculous, that if he knew he was going to have to give up half of his fortune to get rid of this woman who he decides he despises, and he knows what's going to happen, he knows he's going to be punished and looked at by the community as being less than an honest man. He must have had some kind of conflict in his own mind. Why should I do this when I know that she has this sheet that she gave to her parents, and it's just going to show that I'm a liar and I'm going to get fined? Well, what's all this? Well, what for?
Well, you're right. If he knows that that's happened, then he would be rather foolish to do that. You're right. But what if he doesn't think that she's got the sheet? What if he thinks he can get away with it? You could ask the same question, Nachum, about any criminal who does a criminal act, that if he's going to get caught, he's going to be flung in prison for the rest of his life. Why would you do such a thing? Because you think you can get away with it. And I guess this is the same thing. If you stop any criminal, if he stops and thinks about the potential consequences of his actions, if he had half a brain, wouldn't do it. But unfortunately, many people don't have half a brain and don't think, and they also are overconfident and they think they can get away with it, and they do it.
Why would the court fine him and then make him stay with his wife? No.
What it says is, it doesn't say that she has to stay.
Stay married.
What it says is,
stay married.
Let's look at what it says.
Stay married.
Lo yuchal l'shalacha kol yamav. He is not allowed to divorce her. Normally, as we know in Jewish law, a man can divorce his wife by giving her a get.
Yeah.
In this scenario, he cannot divorce her. If she wants out, she can be divorced, but he cannot divorce her. So he loses the right. And this was really, if you think about the historical context, and we've spoken many, many times about how important it is to view the Torah in its historical context. In its historical context here, this is very, very pro-woman. At first glance, it looks pretty anti-woman, and I want to come back to verse 19, which looks a little bit anti-woman as well, at least a bit of it. But if you think about the fine that he's had, this huge fine, and the fact that he loses the right to divorce this woman, that is actually giving women a lot more power and rights than was available to women in that historical context at that particular time. Yes, Julia.
I was just wondering, at this point in time, were men taking more than one wife?
Yes.
Still, so really, it would be possible if he really didn't like her, that he could just ignore her rather than defame her.
But he could, yeah, he could. He could, and he could also divorce her, but then he'd have to pay up the ketubah. And if he just ignored her, he'd also be responsible for the things it says he must do while they're married in the ketubah, which is to give her 3 things: food, clothing, and conjugal rights. So there are responsibilities on a Jewish husband, as you know, which again, in its historical context, was really quite revolutionary.
I thought a wife couldn't divorce her husband because that's why we've got all this problem with the agonuts.
Well, that's right, but in this scenario, I don't think that applies. I could be wrong on that. I need to check it out. but he cannot divorce her in this. I seem to recall reading somewhere that because the pasuk says lo yuchal, he cannot send her, that actually she, in this particular special situation, can be divorced from him. I need to check that out. That may not be right. I may have missed.
I think you are right, Johnny.
Yeah, I think I am right, but I'll check it out because it's.
Also, bear in mind that as well as having to pay a huge fine, he gets Malchus as well.
Yes. That's the Yisru Oto.
The Yisru.
Verse 18, and on the screen it says, and chasten him. And I think you translated it, Leon, slightly differently. I can't remember what you said.
Punish him.
Punish him. Okay, so David Marks is correct. He gets lashes as well, which isn't funny. So yeah, he does get a good old punishment for this. And I think we need to just stop for a moment and reflect on the historical context of women, the status of women. And this is, I think, a good example of how the Torah was actually well ahead of its time in terms of the treatment of women. Howard's been very patient there. Go on, Howard.
Well, two things. Firstly, you seem to be suggesting that her right to divorce him would issue from the defamation. I can't think of any other reason, because he defamed her incorrectly, of course. Okay, that's very interesting. Secondly, do you really want to be, and it's recorded now, but do you really want to be remembered for having said that how important it is to view the Torah in its historical context? It sounds very Jacobsian to me.
No, I don't think that. Well, it may be Jacobsian, but I haven't crossed his red line as we've spoken in the past. Yes, I think it's absolutely vital that the Torah is seen in its historical context. If I would go as far as to say that if you do not see and view and study the Torah in its historical context, then you will be led astray by wrong and improper understanding of the Torah. And I've said this on a few occasions, and I'm happy to say it again, and I'm happy for it to be recorded. And that is this: we have a expression in the Torah which is said 5 times, which is "Ve'asita et hatov vayashar b'nei Hashem." You should do that which is good and upright in the eyes of God. If, when you look at a mitzvah, it does not appear to be upright and good and straight, then it is not a fault with the mitzvah, it's a fault with how you have understood it. And almost certainly, if you go back and look at that mitzvah in its historical context, you will find that actually what the Torah is talking about is tov v'yashar, is good and upright. And often it's the failure to look at the Torah in its historical context which leads people to say, well, that's a load of nonsense. And if that's a load of nonsense, the whole lot's a whole load of nonsense, and I'm having nothing to do with it. And so I would, and thank you for this opportunity to clarify, yes, it is vital that the Torah is seen in its historical context. And this is one of those examples which I think gives the Torah a much deeper understanding when you look at it in its historical context, as opposed to looking at it from a 21st century context.
But wasn't Rabbi Dr. Louis Jacobs' transgression that he wouldn't accept that the Torah was min hashamayim?
Yes, and that's not what I'm saying.
Go on, please explain the difference.
What I'm saying is the Torah was given in a certain historical period, and therefore it had to be understandable and acceptable to that historical period particularly. It also had to be transmittable to future generations, but ultimately it was given in a specific generation. And the example par excellence of this are the korbanot, the sacrifices. And if you look at the Rambam, who speaks about this, it's clear that the thought process, as it were, if one can be so bold as to say such a thing, the thought processes of God when he gave us the commandment of the sacrifices was something like this. I don't want the people to be sacrificing idols and false gods. I want them to be worshipping me. The problem is that they are steeped in idol worship. They are steeped in the methodology of worship of the local people around them and of the historical context, which was to sacrifice children and to sacrifice animals. So there's only so far that I can go to take them away from that at this point in time. So I shall make sure that they don't sacrifice children, and I shall give them certain methods of worshipping me, which they can relate to, i.e. animal sacrifices. And they are, as it were, this is, as it were, God's thinking was a b'di'eved thinking. Really, I'd rather they didn't bother with sacrifices at all. And the Rambam's view, although it's not expressed quite as plainly as this, but the Rambam's view appears to be that when the third temple will be built, there is at the very least a significant doubt as to whether we will return to animal sacrifices, for the simple reason that the historical context of the third temple will not be the same historical context as the first two, which involved animal sacrifice. So the historical context that I'm talking about is Torah min hashamayim, but the time in which Torah min hashamayim came from Shamayim. Louis Jacobs' sin, if you like, was to question the fact that Torah was min hashamayim in the first place. And as I have described it in previous shiurim, that was a red line which he crossed over. And once he had crossed over that red line, he then automatically disqualified himself as an Orthodox Jew. And really, if you boil down Louis Jacobs's sin, that is what it boils down to, crossing that one red line. Everything else that he said and did was not a crossing of a red line.
So, no, I understand exactly that was his transgression or alleged transgression. But if it was given, if it was received min hashamayim, was it not at Har Sinai? And if not Har Sinai, when was it? Okay, so it was at Har Sinai. So what? Well, what historical context is that in terms of Jewish life in Eretz Yisrael? Because the Jewish people at that time had just spent 430 years in Egyptian culture, which involved animal sacrifice. And so you can take the boy out of slavery, but it takes a lot longer to take the slavery out of the boy. When they were given the Torah at Har Sinai, it was 7 weeks after they had left Egypt. And the historical context in which they lived was paganism, Egyptian worship of their particular gods in that particular manner. And that is what they did. In the same way as today, if somebody wanted to start off a whole new religion, then you'd have to have some kind of church, synagogue, mosque. You'd have to have some kind of prayers. You'd have to have some kind of ceremony that you'd have to go through to recognize your God or whatever, however you did it, because that's the historical context that we live in. We live in a society where you worship God by going to shul or church or mosque and saying prayers and doing things like that. So if you were to say a new religion now, and it didn't involve any of those things, the local population would say, well, that's not much of a religion, is it? We don't even go to shul. We don't even go to church. So it's a similar sort of thing. God had, as it were, no choice but to give the Torah in its historical context and to make it understandable to the generation to which it was given.
we then have a responsibility as time goes on to take that Torah, which was min hashamayim, for the avoidance of all doubt, and interpret it in ways which are suitable for our generation. Hence, what you see behind me, Techelet, inspiring Judaism. That's where we are coming from. What we're trying to do is to inspire the 21st century Jew in their Judaism. And if you like, move away from the historical context of then and make it relevant to the historical context of today. And that, as I see it, is the responsibility of rabbis today, leaders today, anybody who has any kind of influence today, to try and make the Torah relevant, inspirational, and most of all, something which can inspire us to a higher level of society. That is what the Torah is meant to do.
Yeah, hold on. There is a problem here, is that you're talking about the third temple and the possibility that there will be no sacrifices, but therefore then we will not be keeping the 613 mitzvot, despite the fact that we have a temple.
Correct. That's exactly right.
That's exactly problematic, right, isn't it?
It is for some people, yeah. It is for some people. But you know, we do that already. We don't do the ceremony of sota. We don't do the ceremony of yibum. We now do chalitza instead, which the Torah is very clear. This is a b'di'eved. To do chalitza, you're meant to do yibum. We don't do that anymore. The Torah is dynamic. It's meant to be dynamic. It's got to be seen in its historical context. And it's not just me saying this. If you look beneath the surface of the Rambam's saying exactly the same thing, that the Torah has to be of relevance. It's a fine line between that and reform with a capital R. And some would say that I've crossed that line. I have been accused of being reform on more than one occasion. I've been called all sorts of things. I've been called an idiot. I've been called a fool. I've been called ignorant. And then when they run out of adjectives which were negative about me, they said, you reform. Like, you know, that's the worst thing you could possibly ever be. And yes, I am reformed, but not with a capital R. I'm reformed with a small r, because I think that that's what you're meant to be. You're meant to be reforming. You're meant to be dynamic. That is why we've had this discussion many, many times. That's why we have an oral law, because it was not meant to be written down, because it was meant to change with the generations. Once it written down, the Torah Shebe'al Peh became the Torah Shebichtav. And we stopped dynamizing as much as we should. We still dynamize, but we didn't dynamize as much as we should. So I don't know how we got onto that, but that is the difference between me and Louis Jacobs. I haven't crossed that red line, at least.
Yeah, we got to that because we were talking about the Torah being revolutionary in its time with women's rights.
Thank you.
But actually, it was my fault, and I'm sorry. And don't forget to pay me my bribe for giving you your opportunity to boost Techelet.
Yeah, you will get it in due course. Nachum, you have a hand up.
Well, it's I'm Nechama.
Okay, Nechama.
I'm listening to it. What I wanted to mention, it's not just this case of the woman who he didn't like and accused with not having virginity. The women in the other cases that we know and we learned, if with you or others, that if there is a case where a man sees a beautiful woman in a war and he likes her and he takes her home and whatever, and then he, you know, she has to go through the whole system. I don't need to mention it now. And then he can.
We can't hear you now.
He can send her away, but he has to pay. He has to give her money. He has to support her. And then the other case is also when a man accuses his woman for being not loyal. If it ends up not being the case, the man has to be also punished.
Yeah, and these are two very good examples of exactly what we're saying here, which is that in its historical context, the Torah was revolutionary regarding women's rights. We had a discussion. Many years ago on Shavuot. It was the very first debate that we ever had in Poleg, and I asked Bernard and Susan Olsborough to debate. This house believes that Judaism is a sexist religion, and Bernard was saying it was, and Susan was saying it wasn't. And it was a fascinating exchange between the two of them, which, of course, we didn't record because it was on Shavuot. It was at Tikkun Leil Shavuot, which is rather a shame we didn't record it because it was extremely thorough and very good indeed. And some of the examples that were brought in support of the Torah's approach to women is exactly this case and the cases that Nechama has just put forward from Parashat Kiteitzei at the beginning of Parashat Kiteitzei and the Parasha of Sotah, which are the two things that she's just mentioned. So let's just, before we finish, let's finish off the story in the Torah, and then next week we'll carry on and see what the Gemarah's got to say about it. So they fine him 100 shekels, which, as we said, is a lot of money, and he can't divorce her. And then what happens? Oh, I just want to go one more point. Look at this point here. And who does he give the 100 shekels to?
Lavi Hanara.
The father of the girl.
Father, yeah.
The father of the girl. That's interesting, isn't it? Why does the father get it and not the girl?
Because he's defamed the father's house.
Yeah, because she.
Defamed the family name.
Absolutely. I'm gonna make Jeffrey Glasky smile now. We can't see him because he's always smiling. We know that. But I'm gonna make him smile now because he's gonna remember this. We were told, and Marcel will remember it as well, we were told in our family that we have to behave properly because it reflects on your parents. Right? So if am I right, Marcel?
100%. 100%.
It reflects on your parents. And that's what we were taught. It was drummed into us. So if this girl if her reputation is defamed, then it reflects on her parents. She belongs in the parents' house at this stage. Where is she going? Bearing in mind, she's only 12 years old, this girl. Where is she going to go now that she realizes that her husband doesn't want her? If she does leave, where's she going to go? She's going to go back to her father's house. She's going to go back to her father's house because she's going to find it difficult now to get married because she's now used goods, isn't she? Because she's been married to this fellow. There's no smoke without fire. Her reputation is not going to be great, even if he is found to have defamed her. There will be people who say, there's no smoke without fire. She must have done something to warrant that. She's going to go back to her father's house. And of course, the household has been defamed, and the fine goes back to the girl's father. And of course, if the girl's father has got anything about him, he will look after that money and he will make sure that it goes to her in due course. Because it's her reputation that has been defamed, and she's going to need that to be looked after because she's going to be finding it hard to find a husband in that historical context. Yes, Julia. No,
I wasn't saying anything, talking to myself. I was just going to say, if she's a wealthy woman, she'll probably attract another man.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's fair enough as well. Yeah, that's the nature of the beast as well. Okay, so let's just finish off what happens to this fellow. Verse 20, so in verse 19, we see that, and verse 18, If he is accusing her falsely, then he gets lashes, which isn't funny, let me tell you. We had it a few months ago. We spoke about how these lashes were given with that. Remember the judge that said, I need to take the tools of my trade with me, one of which was the whip. It's not a funny thing to get lashes. So he gets lashes and he gets a huge fine. And then he's stuck with her for the rest of his days. But verse 20, Leon.
But if this matter was true, signs of virginity were not found on the girl, then they shall take the girl to the entrance of her father's house, and the people of her city shall pelt her with stones, and she shall die, for she had committed an outrage in Israel, to commit adultery in her father's house, and you shall remove the evil from your midst.
Okay, so what's it mean she's committed adultery in her father's house? How does that work? Any ideas?
Until she's married, she's still very much his property, father's property.
Okay, but it's not quite
physically in the house, it's under his aegis.
Yeah, you're right, but it's not quite as simple as that. You're right, but there's a little angle to it, and that is the fact that Jewish marriage consists of two parts, Erusin and Nisuin. Now, today, we do both of them. Well, most Jewish weddings do both of those parts of the wedding, Erusin, which is betrothal, and Nisuin, which is the marriage ceremony. We do them together. But back in the day, and in fact, in some Hasidic circles, it still goes on, Erusin, the betrothal, takes place up to a year, 11 months before the wedding. So during that 11 months of betrothal, that girl stays in her father's house, but she is betrothed to her husband. And if he wants to break off the engagement, there needs to be a get, because the marriage process has started. They can't consummate the marriage until they have done the second part, the nisuin, the kiddushin, the chuppah, the shtar, which is the ketubah, and the ring. And after that, they can consummate the marriage. But the betrothal is the beginning. The erusin is the beginning of the marriage process. So what this is talking about here, she's committed adultery in her father's house. It wouldn't be adultery if she wasn't betrothed. It would just be she'd have had premarital intercourse, which is a different sin altogether. It's not called adultery. She's not considered Eshet Ish, but if she's already betrothed, so in that time between the Erusin and the Nisuin, she stays in her father's house, but she is as if married. And therefore, if she then has relations with another man, that is considered adultery. So it's adultery in her father's house. So we're referring specifically to adultery during the period of Erusin. Now, the period of Erusin is problematic because we all know, sadly, it happens that engagements are broken off. And if you have that situation, you then need a get, and the woman is considered a divorcee. And it's very, very problematic, which is why we have dynamized the halacha, we have modernized the halacha, and we have made the Erusin and the Nisuin to happen at the same time underneath the chuppah. The Erusin takes place immediately before the chuppah, and then the chuppah is the Nisuin. So there is only several minutes where you can break off the Erusin and need a get. So
when people do the, what's it called? It just, mine's just gone blank.
The vort.
The vort, yeah.
Right. So yeah. The vort, the word vort is a Yiddish word which means word.
Yes.
It is not Erusin. In some Hasidic communities, they do Erusin at the Vort, but the whole point of a Vort is that the parents of the bride and groom give their word that they will do everything possible to make the wedding happen. But it is not an Erusin al Piyat Torah. That Erusin does not take place until immediately before the chuppah for exactly the reasons that I've said. So therefore, if you have a Vort and then it gets broken off, you don't need a get. It's not considered part of the marriage process. So we have changed the halacha. Shock, horror, we've changed the halacha, but everybody does it. Yeah, we have modified, we have dynamized, we have reformed the halacha to make it fit for its historical context. Exactly.
Also recognizing the fact that the girls don't get married at the age of 12 and a half today.
Yeah. Although they do in Essex, I believe.
And also, very good. And also, we've reduced the incidence of stoning.
Yes, we have indeed. Okay, right. Yeah, Nachum, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Okay. Well, what I wanted to ask is, it seems like this whole process could have been solved very nicely if they would have had an inspection at the time of the beginning of this potential marriage, that they had an inspection of some kind, and that this girl was determined, that it was determined that this young woman was a virgin, and that this some way along the route that there was an inspection done so that this couldn't happen. So this never would have been a major problem in the marriage.
Okay, I'm gonna let Julia answer that because she's horrified. Come on, Julia, tell us why that wouldn't work.
I actually do think that you are aligning women with cattle to inspect their pedigree. Of course, if you did some sort of inspection like that anyway, the girl wouldn't be a virgin when she's married. I mean, I just think that that's an awful idea. I'm sorry.
What happened? Look what's happened. Her father was upset. Society was upset.
Human rights.
Yeah, I think that's rather a radical solution, Nachum. But
all right.
But it's fine. It's fine. That's we are a very democratic group here, and you're allowed to put forward your outrageous, but nevertheless logical solutions.
You know what, Johnny? When you want to get on the airplane now, they have to inspect you. They have to see whether or not you've had the vaccine. You have to have papers that say that you've been.
We're not cows.
No, the logic is there. We can't fault the logic, Nachum, but we're all for treating women with a little bit more dignity, I think.
But look at the consequences. We're not treating this woman with dignity.
But look at the consequences are because the men don't know how to behave themselves. Nothing to do with women, with the men that we need to deal with here.
I see. Okay. That's a good.
Okay, let's stop at that point because I think that we've had a very interesting discussion today. I don't know we've done much with Gemarah, but we've talked about Louis Jacobs, we've talked about reform, we've talked about the halacha dynamizing, we've talked about women's rights, we've talked about all sorts of interesting things. And next week we may even actually learn a few lines of Gemarah. So next week, wait a minute, what's on next week? It's not Yom Ha'atzmaut next Wednesday, is it? That's next Thursday, right? So next Wednesday will be Yom HaZikaron. There's no reason why we can't have a Gemarah share next Wednesday. So we'll revert to Wednesday next week, please God. And just a reminder, you can stop recording now, Avril. Remind